Welcome back, everybody. We are going to pick up here and talk about plant-like protists. In general, plant-like protists are all referred to as algae. And you've probably heard the word algae before and maybe thought algae were plants. Well, people did used to think algae were plants, but they're not. They are plant-like protists, so they belong in this kingdom. There are both unicellular and multicellular plant-like protists. They are autotrophs, and they actually will make 70% of the Earth's oxygen. So they're very, very important. There are 3 unicellular phyla of these plant-like protists or algae. There's phylum Euglenophyta, they're called the euglenoids. There's phylum Basilophtia, those are the diatoms, and then phylum Dinoflagellata, and these are the dinoflagellates. We're going to look at all those in a minute. There are also then 3 multicellular phyla of algae, and so obviously they're going to be bigger. They're multicellular, and that's red algae, green algae, and brown algae. And yes, they have other names, but luckily for you, we're going to go with red algae, green algae, and brown algae today. All right, let's talk about the unicellular plant-like protists first. And we're going to talk about the euglenoids, or euglena is what these look like. And I apologize, my picture is covering up the words there. So euglena are green. They are unicellular. They live in fresh water. They're autotrophs. They can become heterotrophs under the right conditions, but we don't really talk about that a whole lot. They do have one long flagella right here, and they have chloroplasts inside of them, and the chloroplasts obviously allow them to produce their own food and give them a green color. And so this is what they look like in real life, and this is obviously just a drawing. You'll notice that there is a red eye spot right here. Well, the eye spot is sensitive to light. It's not really an eye, can't see you, but it can sense light. And why would that be important? Well, because they're autotrophs. They need light in order to produce food. Diatoms are the next group, and I think diatoms are really pretty. These to me look like glass. And it's funny because diatoms are found in sand. And what is glass made of? Sand. So their cell walls are made of something called silica. And you can find silica in sand. These you are going to find mostly in the ocean, but they're really, really pretty. They make up what are referred to as phytoplankton, which is produces a large part of the Earth's oxygen. They are at the top surface of the ocean. That's where you find those. And then dinoflagellates are the third type of unicellular algae. And dinoflagellates, individual ones, look like this. They're kind of creepy looking. If you put a whole bunch of them together, they create something called a red tide. And this red tide can be very poisonous to people. Now, if you look at this picture, this is a boat. And so you can see how big the red tide is. And it will literally kill all the sea life there in its wake. So if you've ever heard of a red tide, last summer or the summer before down along the coast of Florida, they had a bad case of red tide, closed a lot of the oceans on the Gulf Coast if you were vacationing at that point. There are some other dinoflagellates that can actually glow in the dark, which are kind of cool as well. Now, the multicellular plant-like protists are the bigger algae that you've definitely, you could see them with the naked eye. Red algae you probably have never actually seen. These you find really, really deep in the ocean. Every once in a while you may find those washed up, but you'd have to be vacationing in a pretty specific part of the world to see that. They absorb green, violet, and blue wavelengths, so they're reflecting red. And you actually find them below 100 meters, and most of us aren't going to venture that far down in the ocean. Green algae you've probably seen, and you may have, I don't know, when I was growing up, we had a pond, and we always called this pond scum. Well, that's what green algae is, and you find it in both fresh and salt water. You can also find it in just like really damp, kind of swampy places. Now, this used to be considered a plant until they realized that it did not have all of the characteristics to allow it to be in the plant kingdom. So now they have grouped this in the kingdom Protista, but it is a multicellular green algae. And then the last one is brown algae. Brown algae is what if you've ever vacationed along, especially along the Atlantic coast of the United States, South Carolina, Florida, and you've seen algae wash up, especially around Hilton Head, that's brown algae, and it's what we typically call seaweed. If you've ever heard of kelp, kelp is a type of a brown algae. Now, it can be brownish, greenish, orange. Sometimes it can even be black. It has little air bladders in it because it can float on the top of the water. They're found in cool, saltwater areas along rocky coasts, and it pretty much means the whole east coast of the United States. Giant kelp are huge. They can be up to 100 meters long. This is kind of what brown algae looks like. These little circles right here, those are the air bladders. Some air bladders there to keep it floating. And I know when I've been swimming in the ocean, I have brushed up against these as well. Okay, so those are the plant-like protists. And then we're going to go ahead and finish this up with fungus-like protists. Now, fungus-like protists are heterotrophs. They can't make their own food, but they do live on dead and decaying things. They have cell walls, and there are two main types. There's what we call slime molds and water molds, and they both reproduce by these spores again, and many of them are decomposers. Water molds are what actually caused the Irish potato famine a long, long time ago, and they look kind of like fuzz on food. This is that mold here. This is what the inside of the potato would look like. This is what it would look like under a microscope there. And then slime molds look like this. If you've been out in the woods, you may or may not have seen slime molds that look like this. They actually, at the very beginning of their life cycle, they look like amoeba and they can move. And then eventually they kind of take hold and they start to grow in moist, shady places. That's why I say usually if you're in the woods somewhere, this is where you're going to find these. They will feed on bacteria too. So that is it for the protists. All right, see ya.